What is, of course, important for creating an entrepreneurial culture in a lab is the open-mindedness.
It gets down rapidly to that of what's the role of academia.
That's a difficult question. That is why I think that many biosolutions companies failed, because they were inspired developing new pharmaceuticals. There you're not pivoting.
In innovation especially, it's all about people.
Yeah.
It works also.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm your host, Philip, and welcome to a new episode of the Flood Bio Show, where I interview the best Europeans in biotech to help you grow. Innovation in biotech mostly comes from translating academic research into products, but it's far from easy. Jens Nielsen is one of the best in this space in Europe. So I went to Copenhagen to talk with him. And I've known Jens for many years, and I met him when he was running one of the largest academic research group in bio. And he's now the CEO of the BioInnovation Institute, or BII. We talked about what works best to translate academic research in bio, especially into innovation for humanity, and especially how everything is connected. And we also talked about how BII is specifically addressing some of the main challenges that bio-entrepreneurs and the biotech ecosystem has. And we talked about the drawbacks of Novo, especially Novo Nordisk Foundation, financing most of Denmark's biotech ecosystem. So here's my conversation with Jens. All right, Jens.
Yes.
Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Philip.
Great. Everything works now.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Ready to go. All right. So I want to start with talking really about translation of science, especially in life science, biotech. I think you are at least one of the best I know in that space, from whether when you were as professor, as PI, the Entrepreneurial lab, now as CEO of BII. Maybe what I want to start with is what were your lessons of what works and also what doesn't work?
Yeah, thank you. That's a difficult question, because it's hard sometimes to define when you have a good case. But let me rather try to start by saying a little bit about my perspective and my view of running my research group, and then that resulted in a number of cases that work and some that did not work. So. When you have a research group, you of course are focusing very much on educating students, PhD students, postdocs, doing research that are of addressing scientific challenges and so on. I'm trained as an engineer, and so therefore I always had the perspective of trying to see that things we do should have some impact on society, and they should address some challenges that eventually could lead to products or services for the society. And so, of course, when you then begin to look at a research problem, you can find things that are big challenges in society, and you start to do research in that area. And here you immediately come into certain things that will not really work for translation, because there are simply some barriers, either regulatory or simply because if you are going to do that, if you're going to pursue a new business in that area, you would have to transform so many things in society and so on. So that I think I learned quite early on, actually, that starting a new venture can be difficult, and you need to be able to find where you can actually address a certain market, and where you also can, and of course there will always be barriers when you make a new venture, but it should be possible to pass them.
So it is finding the sweet spot where your technology or your science is basically solving a problem, and then where it's actually there's a market, not just a market need, but where it fits with the market from the investment market.
Yes. Yeah. Let me take a good example. Something that we did a lot of research on in my group was new biofuels, advanced biofuels, which is something that you could say that is obvious. We need this in society. And I worked very closely also with some of the large oil companies in that area. They were also very active in it, 10 years ago. they all stopped because this is extremely sensitive to the oil price, and this is something you do not, as an entrepreneur, have influence on yourself. And so unless there is, you could say there's made some overall, and maybe we're beginning to move in that direction now, but at that time, it was just impossible to make really, a viable startup company in that area. So there is where you can say, idea, do we need it? Yes, we do in society. Science-wise, can we do it? Yes, we can. But it will not, and it could not work.
How? So I guess the timing also has everything, and startup-wise or even translation or innovation-wise, the timing always is a fine line, and you don't want to be too early. Biofuels, I guess, if you were like 10 years ago, even like the early 2000s was that kind of biofuel bubble which completely bursts, and still today, it didn't take off, or it's still not solved. But how does it translate to you? Maybe your lessons of what works, maybe what works, and also what works when you're running your lab of where you trying to take it like backwards by knowing that there is a need of timing and fit, and a certain type of problem can be translated, and then you move it backwards and you define the research project?
Yeah, so I think, so as I said, we did a lot of research on making advanced biofuels, and that was based on chemicals that could be derived from fatty acids. So therefore we had quite a large research activities on producing fatty acids, and that was using yeast as a production platform. And as I said, we're looking into whether there could be a opportunity to make a startup addressing biofuels, but that I could just begin to see that we would never come through with that. We would never get financing and so on. So then, of course, you start to evaluate where else can we use this technology, and you then maybe begin to look into some specialty fatty acids and stuff like that. And in each case, you need to dig a little bit in order to evaluate, is this potentially interesting? And key metrics that comes out is, of course, market size, because it needs to have a certain market size in order for it to be interesting. But also, can you produce it with the technologies you have now at sufficiently, quality and cost? And so we iterated actually quite around. But then an interesting thing happened is that, with this whole plant-based food movement that you started to see, there was suddenly a need for capabilities in producing fatty acids that had, unique properties for that application. And so the company eventually pivoted into that space and has now raised, several millions of euros to address that market. And this company, we also changed the name. It was originally called Biopetrolia, and then it pivoted and changed name to now Melt and Marble to address that market segment. So I think that's I often say, if you have a very strong research base, there is a good chance that and you did have an application in mind that you can find an outlet for this, but you may have to pivot on the business model several times.
I'm thinking back to my question of what's the lessons here, what works, but I guess being flexible.
I think a key lesson from this is being flexible and not and being open-minded to continuously adapt and learn from what feedback you get. And it can sometimes be hard as a scientist because you get really committed to your cause and think that this is exactly the right thing. But when you want to make startups, I think you have to be more flexible and be willing to scrap your ideas and actually go in a different direction.
Yeah, even thinking about the parallel between life science startups and more digital startups, or let's say any startup, but I think I don't know many startups, even mine, that haven't pivoted.
Yeah.
It's very rare that you start with a projects market and that this is the right fit, product market fit, and that it goes big. It's very rare. So
yeah.
it's interesting to apply that to life science. Where I think you are probably a bit limited or more limited to, your patents and your technology is there, but the application then is usually you have several markets you can tap into, and you can go pretty broad. The example.
No, exactly. No, I agree. And I've reflected a lot on this pivoting, because if you take tech, for example, or IT, there it's very typical that you pivot along, you create MVP, and you evaluate that and so on. In life science, it's hard to make an MVP because, alone to make a product is a difficult task. But I think also where this where Milton Marble is operating is what we call biosolutions space. But what I think that space had suffered a little bit from was that it had the mindset of biotech. And when we talk about biotech, that's often pharmaceuticals and trying to apply that business model, whereas actually the biosolutions should more look at tech for in terms of inspiration in changing and modulating the business plan along the way, but still pivoting, of course, around a very solid scientific route. But that is why I think that many biosolutions companies failed, because they were inspired, of course, from the you could say the more scientific analogy, namely developing new pharmaceuticals. But there you are typically there. You're not pivoting. We see that also at BII. If these companies, maybe they adjust a little bit what disease indication to do approach first. But that's not really a major pivoting. It's just adjustments, you could say.
Yeah, I the whole MVP lean startup.
Yeah,
I think it's. Yeah, I find it. I think it works. Techs for sure, but also in biotech. But I like your point and I think that's probably where it's really tricky as well, is finding how much does it really apply, how much does it not apply. How much can you do the MVP? How quickly can you do MVP? How quickly can you pivot? In tech, maybe, in 3 months you can test the product in the market and then decide yes, no. In biotech will take 9 months, 12 months, even more. How much runway do you have? That's also very hard to apply. And I think also what I can see there, and I think with BI you're addressing this, is that I think that also takes some skills that are typically a bit more, let's say, strategy business skills than typical scientific skills. Maybe you have some scenes, I guess you've seen what works there from making the connection.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. Let me first try to address this about, pivoting still. Because of course you also need at some time stick to a certain plan, because otherwise you will not be able to raise money. And as soon as you begin to raise money, it's important that you maintain the same narrative and actually address that market. So at one time you need to, of course, really dig in and push towards that direction and so on. So I think, and that is also more because you need to have a pretty much laser focus on what product are you aiming for, because as soon as you begin to have to scale up and so on, cost really increases dramatically, and you don't want to waste those money on betting on the wrong product. So in that sense, it's fine to pivot initially around, but you need at one time to settle on something and then stick to it and then hope that is the right thing.
What specific? Can you give specific examples of exactly at what stage you can still pivot? What's the timeline looks like, or is there something a bit ideal like that?
As soon as you begin to, and make the real MVPs, because then in biotech, when you need to have an MVP, you need to have production in certain scale.
How many liters?
So then we are talking about at least 500 liters typically, because otherwise you cannot get enough material to provide to potential future customers for testing and so on. And then, of course, you can adjust a little bit, but it that will really more be smaller adjustments along the way. So it is at that stage that it becomes more and more difficult.
Yeah, but 500 liters, I mean, takes a bit of time and capital.
Exactly. Yeah. You can go to contract manufacturing organizations and have them to, of course, help you and so on, but still it is costly.
Yeah. So we're talking already, I mean, a big seed round, or
yes. You would normally ask. I mean, that you will not really get far with less than 5 million euros as that would be a big seed round. Yeah.
But so maybe that's, I mean, but that maybe you can reflect on the stage before, like basically from, let's say, if we still take this like pivot example from, let's say, someone in the PhD postdoc has found something, maybe patent application, thinking about spinning out to this 5 million.
Mm-hmm.
Like then specifically, how many pivot can he do, or he or she?
Yeah. That's a not too many, because then it becomes time consuming. But this is exactly what we are doing at BII. We are helping these cases at an early stage. So we we often, when we evaluate applicants coming to us, we are looking very much at what is the scientific basis for this? Is there something to build on? We look at what are the founders' first bet on a potential market, and then we also, of course, look at the team. Is this team willing to also maybe pivot if it becomes necessary? So do they have the right agility and flexibility? So these are the three kind of criteria we're looking at. But then in our first program, where we give the companies about €500,000, so it's not a lot of money, but that's really the key objective, is to make the business plan. Mm. So that is to validate these hypothesis that the founders may initially have, or
validate some part of the
exactly, and see that, and hopefully then, based on this, build a sufficient case to get to the seed round that we just talked about.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
And we do see in those 12 months very often that the companies pivot. But normally, it's smaller changes. We have had cases where we have seen a complete pivot, even happening at the boot camp when they come in, and so a completely different company comes out. But these are rare cases. But there are significant adjustments in their business plan in that period of time.
I find that's a good point. I think it comes also a bit with experience, but we nailed right away, but I think that's one of the hardest things to do as an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Because, as you said, you have to be super focused, also not change direction too often, but at the same time being flexible, and you need to be extremely convinced by what you're building, but at the same time being open. I find this it's a very fine line, and it's very individual depending on the market, the technology, even the team synergies, even the location you are at, or what access to capital you have. It's very tricky. But
exactly, and all these factors are in play along the way, and that's also why it's important to take in advice, but you will have to be able to synthesize based on this advice, because sometimes that advice will be orthogonal, of course it's great if you begin to get advice that are all aligning and you can, follow that. But sometimes you will have to make decisions and stick to them, and that is tough. That's also why companies sometimes fail, because you make the wrong decisions. But then you learn from that. You learn in that process, and you can hopefully go back and reflect on what was that decision I made, and based on what assumptions was it.
I think the learning part is it reminds me that we had it on episode 3 at the founder of CureVac, Ingmar Hur, and we talked really from how we started as a PhD in the lab in the garage to building at some point was 20 billion market cap company. Pretty crazy. at the beginning, and I think one thing he said, which one of the takeaway, which for him was extremely difficult in these kind of decisions as well, especially coming from a scientific or engineering mindset, is like a lot of these decisions are basically gut feeling. Like you cannot put a table plus minus and it's not obvious. Or there is like, and somehow, I mean, he took a lot of decisions, which basically gut feeling of, okay, this is probably the right decision. And there's also probably, okay, I just feel it, I'm convinced, but that makes it even harder decisions.
Yes.
But
that is true.
I think as a scientist, that's very important. Just for us to be aware of this, and then at some point taking the decision, sticking to it, evaluating, whatever, 6-9 months later, learning from it, iterating.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't talk about iteration, but
no, but let's not forget that, you know, what we talk about gut feelings is that there is it is, you know, as the expression says, you know, it's a gut feeling as such. But let's not forget that there's a very close communication between the brain and the gut, and what many gut feelings are based on is actually a lot of information that we have obtained. And that's what I said, you know, ask people, and we, based on that, we synthesize that. But maybe why we call it gut feeling is that it's synthesized to some extent unconsciously by us, but it is based on a lot of data and a lot of information that we have collected. And I think that's important. So I just want to emphasize that, because I think it's important when you are an entrepreneur at an early stage that you're very open-minded and ask people, talk to a lot of people and get that information in, because I think it influences you more than sometimes you actually know it does.
But if I see the flip side also, is like you can spend a lot of time listening. At some point also need to make a decision. Correct.
Absolutely. Of course. Yes.
That's also really not especially at the beginning. I mean, even if I reflect on the really beginning of Lab Biotech, which was basically 10 years ago, we had no idea what we were doing. 23 years old, and you hear a lot of things, and sometimes things contradict.
Exactly.
But at some point, you also need to take a decision, try it out.
No, I agree. Absolutely.
And then be laser focused. For it. Okay, so that's good. What else did you see? What works, or what didn't work from maybe even more from let's say, interaction between the different partners? I think at BII you're also really good, and there's a big focus on this of connecting really the academics with potential, let's say, business partners or teams with VCs, and kind of that everyone start to talk together and have an overlap. What did you see there? Like what works, what doesn't?
So network is extremely important to use in that process. I think, you know, this is the biggest challenge that I would say that I faced as you know, being in academia, is that it's relatively still isolated. You know, you may begin to have contacts to some investors that you talk to, and that opens more doors and so on, or maybe you talk to people in industry and so on. But it is in many places, unless of course you are in a very, very strong ecosystem like Boston that is extremely well connected and so on. But that, I think, is the biggest challenge, and that's what we are trying to overcome at BII, to be that place. And it's harder than it sounds, but to be that place where we can connect people, because it is important that you before you get the right yes, that you get some no's, and you will get a lot of no's, as all entrepreneurs have experienced. But as I said, as a scientist are not, you know, we're used to get rejections of our papers and so on, and grant proposals. So the no's is not necessarily the biggest problem. The biggest problem is that it's something new. And as we talked a little bit about that, being able to take in the advice in new areas, but actually make decisions and move on. But that's what I think we're good at BII, that is to bring people into an environment where there is this connection. And of course, my staff is extremely helpful also for the individual companies on these travels. It's hard to give to kind of create, I think, a winning formula. To be quite honest, because I think it is to a large extent the people's game. You need to find people that can really support these cases and have a large network and can actually activate that network to the benefit of those you are helping. And that, as I said, this sounds good, but if I was going to write down a recipe for how to do that, then I think my only key recommendation will be to find the right people to help you to work with this.
Yeah, it's a good pivot to people. I mean, deep down, I think that's also maybe a parallel with tech. But in tech we say like ideas are commodity, execution is everything. Say people and execution is everything. I feel like in science is always, of course, you have something a bit more palpable with patterns or results, data, but still people are. I mean, she's in the startup at least 50% of whatever the success factors are.
Absolutely.
But that's also, people are also very hard to, let's say, change or adapt, or changing a mindset of academic lab to make it more entrepreneurial. I mean, this takes also,
Yeah, and I this is a good point, that coming back and talking a little bit about culture in my research group, because this is also what I really try to install in the group, running a very large group with a lot of ambitious people that are each having, individual career aspiration. It's almost a given, design for disaster in terms of conflicts among people, right? Because they're all, but if you create a culture where everyone feels that they can safely share things, I think I managed to ensure, first of all, collaboration. But that also taught me that this really brings in much more innovation. And I'm talking innovation both in terms of new scientific projects, but also about addressing things. And so and that's what I would like. I think is important also for entrepreneurship. Again, realizing that it's a team effort, and you need to be open for listening to the team. As we talked about several times, you need to make decisions every now and then. But this about creating a culture where everyone feels that they are on the same side and that they're actually working. And as I said, that's tougher in a research group. But if you manage to do that in a research group, you actually also create an environment that I think is very open for innovation going forward.
I think that's. I wanted to touch this on like really the entrepreneurial mindset inside academia or research. I think, that's one thing that what you describe, and I heard it from my best friend was his PhD at ULab, so I kind of heard it also from the inside of the different thing. But I think it works, or at least it seemed to have works really well, and I can see it very similar to some of the biggest entrepreneur labs, let's say Church Lab, Langer Lab at MIT, or some Boston or San Francisco based labs. And I think this seems to, I don't know what's the recipe, but it seems to work, that there is a certain kind of culture that you can set up and it will lead to more innovation and entrepreneur. But I guess it's very related to, the people, and especially to the PI, where this culture has to be positive. I guess you can, I can imagine if you're, also I'm trying to reflect, but if you're a PI, I was in some labs where the PI was very fundamental. I think it would be impossible for a PI like this to change and become more, or become more like your lab, or very entrepreneurial. I don't think there is really a real recipe there. What do you, do you think, let's say, PIs can become more entrepreneurial?
I think what is, of course, important for creating an entrepreneurial culture in a lab is the open-mindedness, right? Because as I said, often a scientific discovery, may find a completely different application than you originally thought of. And if your eyes are suddenly open for that, you should, of course, be open-minded, as I said, to kind of pursue that. And let's just face it that most of the big discoveries in terms of, startups and so on in life science and biotech have actually come out of basic research.
Sure.
So it's not that, that I think the researchers that are kind of really looking deep down to unravel some specific mechanisms in biology cannot lead to startups. But I think what distinguishes a lab, let's have two parallel labs, one from the other, where innovation will come out and startups will come out, is the open-mindedness to look at applications for that science. And that's more difficult because, how do we do that, and I think it is through role models and illustration of this by having more role models, and that I think is what eventually drove the development of the Boston ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. Talking about role models for you, what were your role models? I mean, you're quite close to Bob Lange. It's probably one of the reference in the space.
Yes, I lucky-wise had many role models in my career early on. Various professors, including my own mentor and advisor, was a very strong professor and did excellent research and so on. So, but I think that's the point also, that you develop different role models. But what was important for me in my career was that I spent a sabbatical early on in my career in Boston, and this, first of all, being more ambitious, reaching higher levels, you could say, in what you can aspire to do as a researcher, was one thing I learned. But also this, that if you wanted to find application, you should not necessarily expect anyone else to do it. It's not just publishing papers and then hope something will happen. You actually have to drive this yourself also. So this is what it taught me, and so that I think is important to get that.
I like that. I like this lesson of what works on. I mean, if I summarize what we just discussed on, focusing on the people, entrepreneurial mindset, and really, being open, driving the innovation. I think that's, as a scientist, driving it, not just doing the research. One point I had here, which I think is also super important when you look you talked about biotech or life science industry, and when you look at all the products that are on the market, most of them came somehow through academia. And so most of them, in pharma, maybe some internal pharma R&D, even though, over the last 20 years, it's going down and down. So it's much more academia that translates to biotech. So I think, it's key. It's definitely key there. And I think definitely that's one thing that, at least for seeing what BII is addressing, is that the translation of science, let's say, especially here in Copenhagen or Denmark, there's much more translation that can be done to industry. Where is this interaction with industry? Except everything we discussed, do you see anything else there where something can be more done?
This is a very interesting discussion, and something that I'm quite passionate about also. And I think, let me wind back and say, very early on in my career, I was fortunate to work very closely with industry on a research project. The interesting thing was that they really asked me and my group to do some more fundamental characterization of a process that they were very interested in. And so because they needed to have this deeper knowledge and so on, so it was a perfect, you could say, synergy. We could do research and get, and publish the results and so on, but they got more knowledge that they felt that they could use to improve their process and so on. And so what this taught me was, first of all, sometimes, this idea that industry will just ask you to optimize their process. This is absolutely not the case. Normally, industry are asking in research collaboration actually to do some more fundamental work because they need to have that covered in order to, have a better understanding
or
of their
testing new ideas.
Or testing new ideas or whatever.
They wouldn't do it.
Exactly. So it showed me clearly from early on in my career that there can be a perfect synergy between, doing research. But what it also taught me was that through this collaboration, a number of other interesting research questions appeared that were kind of really interesting to pursue and more fundamental. They, of course, now had relevance for the industry. Okay, so that became a perfect symbiotic. So I could make even better research proposal to get funding for this because I actually knew that this was a real problem and this was interesting for industry. Secondly, it allowed me to bring many of these cases into education. And so when I was teaching in the classroom, I could give examples, and of course, this was at the Technical University of Denmark, so it is an engineering school, and most of the engineering students are interested in real-life applications and so on. But it resulted in that, many of the best students came to me to do their project, their research projects, later on also as PhD students and so on. So I was fortunate at an early stage that I got really good students coming to me because they were interested in this. So I think this was, and as I often say, and this is one example, but I think it at least showcases that there is not a conflict between doing something that has applications and value for the society, and in this case industry, and doing good education and research on the other side. I sometimes also use another, way of explaining this. As a researcher, you can do, basically anything, right? But maybe we could begin to do research in areas that potentially would have some application. And I do understand that there are certain research questions, but actually I think it's very, very small. Even, when you're studying evolution, you learn some things that can and that many people would characterize as very basic research, but you will learn maybe some techniques and stuff that will come out of this that you could find application for. So I'm convinced that any branch of science, any activity of science lead to some new knowledge that could find application. But it's this openness, as we talked about before.
Builds on everything else.
Yeah.
That's why it's so hard to make. I like your point of the synergies because it was something I'm always wondering, and I think it gets down rapidly to that of what's the role of academia and why. I mean, what's the use of public money in academia? Yeah. Whatever, if you spend 2-3% of your GDP, how much should be really? Let's say, if you try to split, how much should be fundamental? How much should serve industry? But I like, in your case, that if you look at it more synergetically, you see that it's not one versus the other. It's together, and that 3% of the GDP will contribute in both ways. And that the more you do on both sides, that everything fits together. I like that a lot.
Yeah. I'm still...
Especially in biology and life sciences.
Exactly. I'm still a strong believer in the academic freedom, of course. But let's... if I'm interested also in the historical development of universities. You had the old classical universities, that the old schools. They was in theology, in medicine, then engineering came, and so on. But really, a transformative university was the Humboldt University. That was the first to say, let's do research. So we can do research-based education, right? Because the training of people was the original foundation of a university. So suddenly then research and education became the two pillars of universities.
It was late 1800s.
That was the late 1800s, exactly. And that was then picked up by Harvard, Yale, and many of the other, Princeton and so on in the US. They looked at Humboldt as a role model, actually, for doing this. Today, of course, exactly as you were saying, the so many taxpayers' money are going into research at the universities that not just for education but also for research, that they are beginning to ask, what do we get for this, right? And so that's why universities are beginning to build this third leg that you can call innovation, where you do expect that some of it comes back. And of course, let's not forget a big part does come back, because many of the candidates that are coming out, for, graduates, PhDs, and so on, are taking jobs in industry. So there is a link there. But can we do even more? And I am certain we can. In Europe, it's now we talk a little bit about Denmark as yes, we could do many more spin-outs in Denmark, I'm pretty sure, but it's a European difference compared with the US.
I was about to say, I mean, I like the perspective. I mean, I like the looking back at the perspective at also what works now. I mean, leads me to wonder, I mean, in Europe, or if it's so clear that there is synergies, and that, let's say, I mean, when you look at Boston, it's crazy how well it works. Like, let's say, why is it not happening more in Europe? I mean, some in Europe are better than others. I mean, I think even you mentioned Cambridge, Oxbridge, I mean, or Imperial or London. I mean, they are super good. I think in Belgium, actually, VIB and that's very good as well. Denmark, I would say, is actually pretty leading. Some countries are probably less good, but why is it not more? If it's so, let's say if it's so clear, why is it not more? I mean, I have some ideas of what's the problem there, but
I think it did become a little bit of a tradition, right? That you had segmented. You still talk about professors sitting in their ivory towers, and so that kind of mental thing is still there, and where, let's not forget, becoming a successful academics is extremely hard work and requires a lot of time and effort and so on. And so, as I often say, most academics are very, incentive driven. And so let's not forget what incentives we have built. That's publications. As a key incentive driver, right? And many professors are hired as universities say, well, you should also be able to teach, but normally that's harder to evaluate and so on. So we have built incentives for professors to focus on that. If we started to build in other incentives, I'm pretty sure we would get for how we designed it.
Do you see that changing? I mean, let's say number of patents, number of money raised.
I begin to see that changed. Yes, absolutely, for sure. So I think, and also I see many more young academics being also interested in their research having impact, and having impact, as I said, it's not just meaning a high impact publication, but actually having impact for society. So
that's good. I was thinking back also from your insight back to what you said about people, and I think also, I mean, for things to change, people to change, sometimes takes a bit more time, or some generation thing as well. To get there, even if you have the willingness, even if you design the system a bit differently, still, I mean, it's heavy stuff, and it takes whatever. I mean, it's always in decades that you really see the change, I guess. That's good. That's good. It's I think, I mean, we covered, I think, pretty broadly there on really translation. Maybe if we go to BII a bit more specifically, I mean, you talked a bit about it as well. I think I really like the model and the problem you're trying to solve, of really like enhancing this translation and being there, supporting. Maybe, I mean, I will present it in an intro, but maybe you can talk maybe on the results. I mean, it's been now a bit more than 5 years. What's the results so far, compared to the initial hypothesis?
Okay. I think that there we, superseded expectations. But, it's also hard to have expectations and set the right expectations when you start something that is so new.
Yeah.
So, but when you build something as massively as BII, which is, we're supported by almost 500 billion euros from the Novo Nordisk Foundation over a 10-year period. So that's a massive, investment, you could say, in building a new ecosystem. But still, what I'm impressed about what we have achieved, we've taken in now, we'll take in a new cohort of companies here on March 1st, but then we'll pass 100 companies that we have supported so far. Many of these companies are still in our program, so that means that they're still in fundraising mode, but still our companies, and we have supported these companies with about 50 million euros in convertible loans and grants and so on. But they have raised about 500 million euros in investments and grants and so on. So, we have really managed to gear the activities quite significantly.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, you have almost 10x multiple.
Yeah.
And then can you talk a bit specifically on the program of how, basically what the companies get and what's, let's say the program, maybe a short summary of that.
Yes, of course, yeah. If we go back to a little bit what we talked about, the fundamental challenge you have as you're sitting as a young academic and you have an idea, you need to build that business plan, and that's really what we designed it out from, because the reason why we do not see so many startups here compared with Boston is because we don't have enough entrepreneurs that understand and can kind of go around at the universities and pull out cases and make a business case and propose it to investors. So we see it a little bit as a long-term objective of really training and educating more entrepreneurs in the space. And so therefore we designed this program that we call Venture Lab, where exactly we take young academics, we take them into this program, we let them drive the process, because we want them to be educated and trained in doing a business case. And then they go through a 12 months, we give them €500,000 in capital. And then they get 12 months to go through, how to build a business plan. Who are your customers? What are the regulatory constraints we talked about? What are all the other, how do you secure IP and stuff like that? All are elements.
And doing it.
Not just not just talking about it, but actually doing it on your case, each individual case. Then maybe also important is that we take in companies in cohorts. So there's both some peer learning, also a little bit of peer competition, of course, but that works fine. And so a cohort of companies go through this 12 months. It's a little bit like going to class, but you're really working on your own case that you're maturing.
And they have access to, you have labs here. So
we have labs.
3,500 square meters.
Yes, exactly. There. We have labs, fully functioning labs.
So they're all moving in office and lab and they work.
And they are here.
Space,
exactly. And we have created large investor network. We talked about the relevance of networks also, industry networks, so we can facilitate that they can talk to people. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. I think it's one thing where you are really, where there's really the bridge of this pre-seed money that you invest. I mean, to be honest, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I was looking for building a next venture, talking with some scientists from DTU. We were talking with BII actually with some people from your team. I think this 500,000 kind of pre-seed, as in, okay, you have ID patent and then you can work for 12 months. I mean, you can really, it really can bridge between the academic lab to then being ready to raise a seed.
Yes.
in whatever level of seed or Series A even directly, but you can really cross that bridge. And sometimes that's, especially when you come from academia, especially on deep science and when you need kind of, let's say, advance on the MVP stuff, that's where you need, I don't know if you need 500K. I mean, those advance, if I look at more like YC or Entrepreneur First, which I would guess are in a similar stage level as well.
Similar.
It's more around 100K that you get for, but at the same time, usually they don't really get to MVP, or they need additional cash there. So, but I think this is really crucial for getting them started, and because if you don't get this step, then
exactly
nothing happens with it.
And it serves let me just come back to, you call it investment, let me come back to that. But I mean, it serves the purpose, of course, of building companies. But I think it's important to emphasize this, that I mentioned that we see it really as an objective also of training people. And we are, of course, very happy that the companies actually succeed, raise money, move on, and hopefully, bring products to the market that address unmet needs and all these kind of things. But we... And the reason why I'm emphasizing this about training people is that we strongly believe in the idea of it's possible to take academics and train them to become entrepreneurs. And for you coming from tech, you say, yes, what's the problem with this? But I can tell you that many investors in life science in Europe do not believe in this idea. There, the sentiment for a long time has been, as soon as we invest in the companies, let's get rid of the founders. And we look at this very differently. And that brings me also to the way we support them. We don't see it as investment. Well, first of all, because we can take this luxurious position because we get the money to support us as charitable financing from the Novo Nordisk Foundation. So we don't have to give the money back. But we give it as convertible loans at very founder-friendly conditions. So therefore, the founders feel that we are standing on their side also on the travel along the way. And I think that's an important element also in this. They really trust us when they have to do that jump.
I like that. Yeah, I like that. I mean, and one thing that I'm pretty impressed by BII point of view is really also the internal team you were able to attract. I mean, yourself, but also, I mean, I know Bobby, the CBO, Christian, in the SynBio team, and some others. I mean, which I think is one of the things that I always see in Europe, which is really lacking, is all these like bioincubators and programs, and then the people are like, it's not like, it's not people who really know what they're doing versus. We had Johannes Früher from Lab Central Biolabs on the podcast, and now he also in discussion with Novo. But I mean, I think there is some parallels there where someone really experienced, has built companies, has VC experience, and at the end, I mean, what we also discussed, people, everything, and yes, I mean, in innovation especially, it's all about people. And here, I mean, when the people come, it's people building companies together, and I think that's, I mean, then you take YC or EF, they have amazing people being able to hire, which I think is a key. I mean, I think it's key.
Yeah. No, I agree. And, I think also that's, of course, an interesting observation over the years, because I think in the beginning, we were perceived a little bit as, we would help some of these young startups and so on, and that's fine. And by the, traditional biotech environment in Denmark, but now we have grown to a situation where everyone is taking us very serious. So we have all the experienced biotech people, coming in and helping our companies and so on. So in that sense, we have also really become that center for this, and that, of course, I'm very proud of and happy to see that we have succeeded in. So it doesn't become, something parallel to what was there already before.
Yeah, I know having quite a few of your entrepreneurial residents or mentors, which is basically all the best. Let's say, especially in Copenhagen or Danish, really, really impressive. I mean, one thing that I mean, it sounds like you're really doing it. Yeah, seems to me of results and works. I think if I play a bit devil's advocate, what you mentioned of like we have the luxury of the Novo. I mean, it's a big luxury, but it's also I guess it makes it easier. Like if you have, whatever, 500 over 10 years, that's 50 million a year that you can invest / burn, but invest and spend. I mean, makes everything easier. Well, I mean, still need to spend it well and etc. But thinking of like, but it makes sense. But it's.
I think a very, what you're maybe alluding to here, how could we replicate this without spending that much money somewhere else? And that, I think, would be key learnings, of course, from here, because, let's say that's fantastic if we can build a strong ecosystem here in Copenhagen, and that's, of course, good for Copenhagen and Denmark and so on. But how do we help, Berlin, Heidelberg, Paris, other places in Europe where this also would work? But do it more cost effectively, because most other countries don't have a charitable organization like the Novo Nordisk Foundation to help them, and this is something we are looking into. Yeah. How can we, and maybe the models would be slightly different, but still with the same goal in mind. And how can we then unleash, maybe not fully commercial kind of investment type, but strategic kind of investment type to drive agendas to begin to do this, of course. Yeah, so this, but it's difficult, as I sometimes say. It's interesting when we have international visitors, from France, Germany, England, and other places. They come, they get super excited, and they all say, "Oh, we would like to have a BII," until I tell them what it costs. Then the interest drops a little bit, because but I think we will be able to figure this out, and this is something we are working on right now.
I guess that's what actually I always thought was there's something puzzling, but I think that's probably the biggest limiting factors in access to capital available / let's say the return on capital compared to other options. Because but deep down, everything we discussed before as well. If you don't have enough capital, then you don't have the right people.
Yes.
Yeah. You cannot invest enough to seed the companies, etc. And then everything breaks. Because at the end, the formula, you need to execute and find the right people and find the companies, everything. But still, if you don't have enough capital to execute everything, like in any startup, if you don't raise enough, you cannot execute and everything. Yeah, that's a good. Yeah. I was looking, if we zoom out on the Novo Nordisk Foundation, because I think that's one thing that strikes me here in, let's say, in Denmark. I was in this building actually, I think it was like 7 years ago, and we did like a documentary about biotech in Denmark. And of course I knew Novo Nordisk, I knew Novozymes, but then when I arrived here, I was like, okay, actually everyone, basically, almost everyone receives money from Novo somehow. Even like the research institutes are basically granted or built even by, they have the Novo name. Here is basically one of the institutes. And then the Novo, let's say Novo Holding as an investment vehicle, which is, I think, even in one of the biggest, let's say, evergreen / private equity fund in life science, even globally, which is crazy. And people don't, even in the industry, don't know how big and how large it is. Which I find quite fascinating with the Novo Foundation, is that there's not that many like drawbacks or like flip sides. If I looked into our critics, there's a few, but it sounds like the ideal thing of super successful company, Novo Nordisk, which also has not that many scandals behind in, let's say, in a pharma standard, and like doing, I think, amazing products. Right now especially it's going crazy with Regenvi, but amazing companies with a foundation that controls the company, with dividends and profits coming in, reinvested. I mean, sounds like the ideal thing. I was obviously looking into like, okay, what's like sounds too good to be true.
Yeah.
Is that so actually? What's your like opinion?
Yeah, it is almost too good to be true, and to some extent. But of course, there is. But that's also why the organization, I think, and I think that same culture was, instilled in BII, that we need to have a certain humbleness. We need to be aware of the big impact that we actually have, and therefore the way we do things and set up things has to be in line with this. But of course, when you become so large and dominant, it does have consequences. I mean, if you look at the Danish research environment and really performed a deep dive, I'm pretty sure that you will find that it's to some extent skewed on what Novo Nordisk Foundation is supporting.
That's one of the big critiques.
And you could say that
most of the life science in Denmark is very oriented to
beginning to
Nordisk.
Lucky-wise, they still give a lot of money for open-ended research and so on. But you could argue, is that so problematic? I mean, after all, we are a small country, so do we need to be strong in all areas of science? Is it maybe fine that we begin to stick up really in certain areas of life science? And I think, if we, it's kind of interesting if we look at our portfolio of companies and let's take therapeutics, because this is what most people can relate to in biotech. Of course, we have a lot of oncology companies. Not surprisingly, any accelerator around the world will have that. We have some of them that are strong. Some of them have raised a lot of money. There's also a lot of VC investments in that space. So, this is fine. Do any of them stick out compared with, what you have in Boston and other places? I don't know. I don't know enough about it to be quite honest, but I doubt they would. But they're good companies, and I'm sure they will be successful, and hopefully many of them will develop new cancer medicines. Right. What is interesting is that we probably is one of the accelerators / incubators in the world that has the most companies in metabolic diseases compared with our portfolio, and even addressing metabolic diseases with peptide-based pharmaceuticals. And this is not by us selecting for that, because we always select the best companies in every cohort we come in. But this is the outcome of that. You can say over years select, and then you suddenly, and then you look at that, and then, I say, of course, because this is where we have a very strong research base in Denmark. And so I think that is a reflection of what we just talked about, that Novo Nordisk Foundation has, and probably also Novo Nordisk themselves, sponsored and supported research activities in that areas over, tens of years. And, there we are building some very, very strong and interesting companies that I think are more unique compared with what you find many other places. And is that a strength? Yeah, I think it is. So, but one can, of course, raise criticism around it, but as long as the foundation is, thoughtful and careful about its supportive activities, I think it is a strength.
Yeah, I really don't see that many setbacks. And even, what we discussed before, the synergies you have when you specialize a bit more in one space, from the academia to even BII to industry. And the synergies you can create when people work in a similar space are also,
yes.
You've got a lot of great advantages, and even and the people working in similar space can transition from one space to another, one company to another. And no, that's remarkable. One thing that really I find remarkable, and you mentioned the humbleness, is really this that I saw here. especially, it's really struck me, especially in Denmark or in Copenhagen, where basically the money comes from basically one organization. Most of the money comes from one organization. Everyone goes to pretty much the same university, to DTU or Copenhagen Business School or one program. But still, like, everyone is very humble. I mean, it comes to the root culture, I think, in the Danish culture, and I think everyone kind of works together.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you compare to other where like people are always fighting. I mean, in Paris, people are always fighting and one against another and like not working together and working in a smart way. I don't know. I feel like it's always it struck me quite remarkable that it functions so long, and especially when you add so much cash, because usually the more cash you put on any balance, the more you have jealousy and fighting and stuff, and I guess it's not ideal, and there's some of this, but still I find it remarkable. And at the end, if you look from a long-term view, I mean, the results is also amazing. Like, so.
Yeah, it's good reflections. You know, there is a certain element, of course, in Danish culture that buys into this, but I think it's also to some extent from the Novo Nordisk company culture. So if one reads about the early stage and the early foundation, Novo Nordisk as a company were among the first to get, to for example, begin to give maternity rights and maternity payments for women. We're talking about, very early stage, right? So they were always very supportive of their employees. It was voted for many years the best place to work in Denmark, and so on. And building as a bigger and bigger company, of course, that becomes a benchmark. And I think many other companies. So I think the impact is more than just the money. It really also was a culture that was established, and that was pioneering of the founders of the company to actually to think around this. But that's, we talked about it several times. Today, it's more obvious that people is the key asset you have. But if you go back to that time to see that, I think was visionary, and I think that is a part to play. But Danish culture is also, we have this, something that I'm not a great fan of, that they call it jantelov. I mean, it's hard to explain, translate directly, but, it's basically just saying that you should not stick your neck out too far. You should not brag and so on. Exactly. And that, and the reason why I am not to, I don't think that's a very strong trait, because it does prevent, people to take leadership sometimes and set ambitious goals and so on. But it, of course, because it is there and unspoken of, it also means that you as a leader need to make sure that, you kind of embrace your team and make sure that everybody, follows you. And so, yeah.
No, that's great. I think, I mean, I like that. If I look also one thing, even for our audience to understand as well, I mean, Denmark, thinking about the country, but it's basically not even 6 million people. So it's like half of Paris.
Yeah.
So it's like, also, I mean, the scale is smaller, but even compared to a city, I mean, it makes different dynamics, but still, it's still, I mean, 6 million starts to be quite sizable as well. And I mean, I think the second also, let's say, thing to put in perspective is also, there's some, let's say, luck, especially from the Nordisk side of, I mean, diabetes. It was impossible to predict that it would go that big. I mean, even though, of course, they executed brilliantly. I mean, in keeping a market leadership and like at that scale is insane. But still, there is some, like, let's say, luck of, it's a market that's exploded, and when your market explodes, of course, your company explodes with it. But I mean, that's, as everything in entrepreneurship, there's a big luck component as well.
Of course, there was being a company that has as a main business focus on, diabetes, And yes, of course, because of obesity epidemics, diabetes has also increased as a disease. So the market has increased, but suddenly being able to go from there to begin to address the maybe more underlying problem, obesity, and then that you have drugs that can actually do that. That is, of course, a little element of luck in that. But being able, as always, luck is good. We have an expression. It's an old expression from a Danish entrepreneur. That luck favors the prepared one, right? And if you were not able to use it, then you can be lucky. But if you were not prepared for using that luck, then
yeah. I mean, I think luck is not. I mean, it's part of every entrepreneurial journey. I mean, I was listening to one entrepreneur. He was saying that basically more than 50% of the success was luck.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that it's necessarily like negative. It's just more accepting that it's part of it. But then, even if an average is 50%, sometimes can be even more. I mean, even diabetes, I think, was the market I looked was like 10x over 20 or 30 years. I mean, this is from a market growth is insane.
Yes.
So just from being in the right space and being already there, and then the market explodes is, I mean, there's a big luck component.
Yes.
It still doesn't like withdraw the merit of being able to capture that luck and execute on it.
No.
Comes down to it. That's great. Maybe I want to finish more on a bit more on yourself. I mean, you talked a bit about the mentor and everything we discussed. There's definitely a lot of your personal lessons. I want to finish on one thing that quite struck me when you joined BII, which was, okay, wow, Jens is joining BII CEO and you're still keeping professorship, but your lab, basically, you were kind of continuing what was ongoing, but I think now is pretty much closed down or not running.
Mm-hmm.
Which I found, I'd say quite surprising, / I don't have many other examples of someone. I mean, your lab, you had basically over 75 people at some point, and whatever, H-index 150 or something, and really, I mean, building, as you said, so difficult as well to be PI at that level, and then such a big transition. I mean, I was quite surprised, and I don't know many, but can you reflect on it maybe now, 5 years later, of how you took this decision, how it went,
Let me first start by saying I have not regretted it, but it was a big decision. Of course, it was. As I often say, I could happily have been professor until my retirement, and I thought it was fantastic to engage, and train young people, doing research and work with them. That's something I get a lot of energy out of. I found it super exciting also to take some of the research and make spin-out companies and so on. So all these things, but on the other hand, when this opportunity arose, you say, okay, you could take leadership of BII and build this. And then as I know the ambition level from the Novo Nordisk Foundation can be high, that was a golden opportunity to focus 100% on something that I'm passionate about, and that is, you can say, translating science from universities into, startups that are viable and eventually, address unmet needs and so on. And yes, I could continue doing that in my research group, but here I could do it on a bigger scale and help many others to do that. And it's as I said, it was a big decision, but maybe also published more than 800 papers at that time and educated, now my last students are graduating, more than 100 PhD students and so on. And of course, I could do more of that, but I kind of had fulfilled, some of the objectives you could aim for, probably for a lifetime. So, and if I was going to do something else, it would be something like this. So all this went into my mind, and then I said, okay, let me do the jump. But I can tell you, many of my colleagues were shocked also. They said, what? But some of them also, thought that it was extremely brave to dare to try to do something else, but anyway, yeah.
I like that. I mean, I have to say, from all our discussions so far, and now what you have achieved, I can see much more the much more connection and synergies and how it fits together. Then when you did the jump, I was like, okay. I mean, yeah. Now from our discussion, it makes even more sense, which I quite like. I mean, I think it's also, and what we said also, I mean, this kind of jump is also more of a typical, like, let's say, more US style, let's say Boston style of, okay, you doing more dramatic changes, but it works also.
Yes, yeah. And, and let's also not forget that one of the things I mentioned, that I get a lot of energy of working with young people and training them and so on. But there is still that element here, and that's what that is the same, both young people in my own staff, but also, all the startup companies that I meet and, helping them and instigating hopefully energy and drive into them. So
that's where I can see a lot of overlap. Like, it reminds me the episode 11 that is coming out. Will come out when it will be released, which is Sander van Deventer, who was at Amsterdam and founder of Unicure, was a professor and then transitioned to become like really founding a gene therapy company and really running it, and then now VC, made also this big jump. But when we discussed this, like, what struck me is how everything is quite connected.
Yes.
We had separate jobs, but deep down, what you started our conversation was like, you have this engineering mindset and trying to apply and translate science. And that's like the pillar. And then you can be more PI, you can be more incubator. I mean, probably you can be a very good VC as well, I can imagine. And you are half investor there. So at the end, it's a bit different hats, but they're so connected.
Exactly.
I like that. I mean, and I think the whole discussion here as well, I like how also we had always realized how everything is quite connected. And I think, I mean, if I summarize to my initial question of like what works, but what works is to realize that everything is connected, and that instead of opposing whatever one academic or fundamental from other, like when you start seeing that everything is very connected and embracing this versus rejecting it.
Yeah, exactly.
Conclusion.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I agree completely. This is a very good summary. And
Great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Philip. It was great.
I think it's one of the best roundup where everything fits together perfectly. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks for listening to the end. I love the episode, especially how Jens is passionate and humble, and how everything is connected and all the synergies when you're trying to translate science into products. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit the like or follow button. And if you are on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you can even leave a review. Any of these actions would help the show a lot and help us get better speakers, improve the production, and help you get better episodes. I would also be curious to know what you think, so please feel free to leave a comment if you're on YouTube or Spotify, and you can also write me directly an email to philip@flood.bio. All right, see you in the next episode.